And just to confirm, you can see my screen?
Yes, it's all good.
Awesome. So today I wanted to take some time and talk a little bit about, where managed security services are going, some of the trends there, some of the things I'm seeing with my customers and for Akamai itself around frameworks, and a specific framework that is gaining a lot of traction in my area to protect that edge. So again, I'm an advisory CISO at Akamai. I spend a lot of time with customers, understanding what their challenges are, understanding how our capabilities are working for them and what we should be focused on in the future. And in that realm, one of the things that I love about this as we look at these bigger frameworks is this trend we've seen with our customers where, when I was at Charles Schwab or at Nordstrom, we had over 50, over 100 different security tools. And that's a lot of complexity to manage, a lot of data to integrate. You need automation, you need machine learning or artificial intelligence to not have such staffing bloat that it just becomes unmanageable. And I love this quote from Michael Jordan that, a great athlete might win a game, but you need teamwork and intelligence to win championships. And so with that, we'll jump in here. So the first thing I want to talk about is some trends I'm seeing in managed services. So the first is an MSSP worked awesome when you had Oracle and Microsoft and Cisco equipment, because everybody knew what those common indicators of compromise would be. But then as we got into DevOps, we got into more customized applications. We got into coding that our alerts were unique to us. And now you have somebody that's a third party trying to understand these unique alerts. And so it was kind of breaking down a little bit as far as just the generic ability for them to work. And then we started, we want to go out and we'd get a threat intelligence capability. Whether it was in-house or out-of-house, now we're trying to integrate that threat intelligence with a third-party service provider, and that gets complex. And as we have new privacy or other regulations, depending on your industry, come up, now how do we make sure we're compliant across those different regions that we operate in, different countries, and different capabilities? And so now we're trying to make sure that our vendor is doing that for us. And the next thing we did is we moved into these hybrid where I have some on-prem and some capabilities in the cloud, and I'm going with the cloud first strategy. And now my service provider is trying to understand which of my capabilities are on-prem, which are in the cloud, different alerts, different rights, different audit rights, different access rights. And this was becoming more difficult. And finally, the amount of third-party data that we have. Where do I have customer data, employee data, capability data if I'm in manufacturing? For those of you who have websites with heavy customer interaction, you have a number of JavaScript environment actions. You may have outsourced your credit card, your PCI infrastructure. Your marketing has put stuff in there, so they're pulling customer data straight into a third-party marketing company. And so all this just makes it very, very difficult to have an effective external MSS. And then we saw MSS start to shift away from just kind of that external entity that sat over here to getting very integrated and actually taking actions around remediation. And so, this was kind of that response, and they're part of the IR team, they're part of remediation, they're managing your infrastructure. And then again, now you have handoff between, your engineers, this external SOC, third-party vendors interacting. And so these are just more management, but it's helping overcome that first trend. And then the final thing I want to touch on is some unique capabilities. So you may have a specific function. So at Akamai, one of the services we offer is protecting against denial of service attacks. You may not want to have that skill in-house. It doesn't happen that often. When it does, it's kind of a unique skill set. So do you want to maintain a skill set like that in-house, or do you want to have an expert that does that when it happens? But that's kind of a dangerous trail to go down, because how many one-offs, how many unique environments are you going to do that for? And that gets back to our problem with a number of great athletes instead of a solid integrated team. So basically, this whole MSS question is around how are we going to focus on what our core is? Are the business we offer, the service we provide, versus, both on IT and in security, where should we be outsourcing this? And so the next thing I want to talk about is kind of an approach. So, before we were talking about some functions, I want to bring us all the way up and think more about a strategy. How are we going to organize our program? How are we going to architect our infrastructure? And as we think about this, the framework does a couple key things. It provides us the ability, when leadership comes down and talks about where we are, we can measure our maturity against a framework. We can set our goals against a framework. I can tell the auditors where we are, be they internal or external. If you're, in finance, you may have the feds coming in and reviewing you. If you're using credit cards, you have PCI auditors coming in. And those frameworks give you the ability to talk around where your program is. At the very highest level, you may have NIST as your overall governing body framework. If you get into very specific things like the SOC, you may use the MITRE ATT&CK framework to measure the maturity of your SOC. I'm kind of talking about the middle level, kind of an operational level between those two, where there's a trend for people to say, I want one platform around the endpoint, one platform around the edge, my interface with customers and now my remote employees, and then maybe a third platform around the network, incident response, situational awareness, a SIEM, a SOAR, whatever you're using. And this gives me the ability to do some things. There are some benefits here, because we're talking about one of those frameworks today. We're going to focus on the edge framework. What I'm going to talk about today, I think, is fairly uniform in the approach and benefits across all those different platforms, whether you go to 3 or 5 or however you're designed. So for that edge, you want to reduce complexity and increase situational awareness by staying with one vendor that provides multiple capabilities. I'm then now simplifying vendor management and improving compliance, because if I'm going with a 1 or 2, then I can have very stringent requirements around them, as opposed to if I have a very small one-off company that might not meet all of my compliance needs, because they're a specialist and I'm buying them just to solve one gap in my infrastructure. Staffing, both getting talent and talking to leadership about how much staff you need, is a challenge. And the other problem I used to have, and still do to some degree, is, if you have 100 different capabilities, you may have one engineer managing 6 different, capabilities. And so your DLP program is not going to be optimized. It's not going to be up to date. It's not going to be the best it can be, because they have 5 other capabilities they have to manage. So that's another problem we want to solve. And then this is the edge. This is where we're interacting. We want to have a great experience. We want the customer to have just a joyful time while they're on our site. So we want to reduce security, infrastructure, and friction. We want to reduce latency, and we want to have that positive experience. And so Gartner has come out with this concept called SASE, the Secure Access Service Edge. And what we're doing here is we're combining performance and security. In these outsourced things, the goal is to have one vendor that would provide all this. I will tell you today, there is no one vendor that provides everything on this list, but there are a set of vendors and there's recommendations on which vendors present enough of these to start partnering with to move towards some of those benefits. I'll address a little bit of the alphabet soup. You know, on the left, you have a software-defined WAN. You have a content delivery network, somebody like Akamai. On the right side, you have a CASB, which is your cloud security broker. You have secure web gateway. You have a couple flavors for remote access. You have a VPN, virtual private network, or a zero trust network access. We'll talk about those a little bit more later. You have your WAF or your API interface, your traditional firewall, whether it be an on-prem or in-cloud firewall. You want to protect your domain name server. We see denial of service attack and compromises being used there, so that should be secure. And then remote browser isolation. So these are our two sets of capabilities that you want to integrate into one capability. So the next thing we'll talk about is, that sounds great. That's huge, looks complex. We need to tailor this framework to our environment. And so let's say that I'll use a bank. So I may have a heavy branch, which is the centralized office in each country. And then I may have smaller branches, which is individual community bank representation branches. And so I may have a heavy branch and a thin branch. You know, you can apply that to retail or insurance or anything where, you know, you may have an agent in their house with a thin branch. Or you can go to an infrastructure where you're cloud first or cloud native. And in that case, there's a different set of capabilities that you would want to focus on. So again, the last graphic and this graphic are graphics straight out of the report, but I love these because they're a way to think about your infrastructure. And so you can sit down and immediately tailor this so it fits you, have an industry peer-reviewed capability that you are now able to take to your leadership and say, this is our approach. This is where we're at. Here's our gap analysis. Here's our end state when we'll be fully mature. So I think these are great. I will point out one thing that's kind of be interesting throughout this. You will see data loss prevention and sandbox and some other things on this graphic you didn't see on the one before. And then you'll hear about some capabilities like denial of service that's talked about in the paper but not represented in this. So you are going to take some time to make sure that this fits you and your environment. And then there are some things that just aren't addressed yet. In August of 2000, around JavaScript challenges that you may want to integrate into this solution. And so there are a number of things to think about as you tailor this for your specific needs. The other thing is, we're not going to do all that in 3 months. We're not going to get the budget. We're not going to have the time. We're not going to have the focus. And so another approach that makes sense is we want to say, let's step back and have a phased approach. And the first thing, and you can see this, you know, shift to 2020, it is 2020. So just move that date forward. But basically the recommendation is start with access. And a lot of this is around access. And the initial paper was focused on employee, but it can be applied to your customer situation or your employee situation. The next thing you want to do is move into your CASBs, your security brokers, your secure web gateway, making sure you're intercepting activities going out, be it a command and control, or somebody clicks on a phishing email, or somebody's trying to go to an inappropriate site. You want that secure web gateway, and then you want to expand into these others. But I would also say this is an area to tailor. If your resiliency is very important, you may want to start with DNS, because, you know, access for customers would be that over to zero trust network access. So think through your use case, what you're protecting, what your priorities are on your business model. And then I would sit down and come up with kind of these phases as the way that you want to approach this. And again, remember, this is two sides. So on the performance side, this is a one time we want security to think about going faster. Typically, we in security aren't designed to go faster. So while I, as an advisory CISO, tend to focus on that right side, I want you to think through the left side as you come up with your strategy. And if you're in an SD-WAN, how is that going to be built? How is it efficient? How are you going to integrate with it? Are you going to use a carrier to speed you up or content delivery network to speed you up that last mile? Do you have international requirements? If so, you're going to need to think about international capabilities versus national. If you're local, where are you going to be able to get that capability at the right size for your smaller business? So there's a lot of challenges there to think through. So let's say we're going to do that traditional, and we're going to start with zero trust. So I love that, if you have 5 engineers, cyber engineers in a room, and you ask for a definition of zero trust, you'll probably get between 7 and 8 definitions. And so I'm going to start off with just kind of a very high level discussion about what I mean when I say zero trust. So there is the traditional thought process, and zero trust really originally came out of a Forrester concept, and Forrester still is writing a lot about it. So great place to go read about it. There are a group out there that is focused on microsegmentation. And so sticking with the traditional VPN, accepting some of the recent security threats that are coming out around it, and modifying or minimizing those, through microsegmentation. There's another group out there, I think one of the better known places is Google Beyond Corp, that's really focused on application layer access. To go away from layer 3 VPNs and come up to layer 7 application. Reduces risk from lateral management. I know when I was at Nordstrom, I was told, the board needs this deck by 3 o'clock tomorrow. You're not going to get a VPN provision in that time. Something like the zero trust network access, the application owner can provision things, but again, that's a two-edged sword, because are they going to know that Steve Winterfeld left the company and needs to be deprovisioned? So you have a lot more process requirements in auditing. So pluses and minuses to both approach. I will highlight that NIST 800-207 is a zero trust document that gives a great explanation of both those different approaches and the benefits and risks to both of those. Some notes out of the SASE paper itself. When you're thinking about zero trust network approach, it's really around managing that identity and the device. Knowing, is that device the right device? If Winterfeld logged in from Colorado and 2 minutes later is trying to log in from California, you want to be able to understand that and be aware of both the device security and the individual's credentials. You want to do this not in isolation. Just because you're having that VPN, you still want to do that layered defense. So you want to put a firewall or a web application firewall in front of that and make sure that you're monitoring who's attacking you. And then you'll probably want a secure web gateway on the backside if somebody did get in to intercept them on the way out. So this still should be part of a defense in depth. It's just not a defense of a network. And finally, going to the leading vendors right now are probably going to be really pushing the edge. And when I say the edge, that last mile close to the user, dealing with the fact that You know, there are kids doing homework and 3 people working out of the house and the whole neighborhood's that way, and getting that last mile of performance. So I think this is just a great way to think about that. First step is going to need a program in and of itself. You're going to have to pick which technique you want to follow and then go ahead and pursue that capability. I want to talk about some of the closing thoughts and takeaways. So we've talked a lot in this one about potentially outsourcing, potentially doing that in an effective, efficient way through moving to these platforms, using those as our strategy and our framework. One of the things that you're going to find as you look at this, and the reason I wanted to talk at this conference was these frameworks don't necessarily talk about machine learning, AI, and automation. You're not going to see those in the document. You're going to, and for those who I keep saying the Gartner paper, under additional resources here, you can see the Gartner paper is called The Future of Network Security is in the Cloud. If you want a copy of that, reach out onto me in LinkedIn and just say, hey, heard your talk, want a copy of the SASE paper, and I'll make sure you get one. There are a number of places you can get that out there today. Going back before I randomly change thoughts there on you, my ADD is fully active right now, is we need to add the criteria around automation and machine learning when we're evaluating and building our strategy. So if you go to one of these vendors and they're gonna, we all say the same, we have what you need. I don't know what your problem is, but we have you need. I'm making that joke from one of the earlier sessions. Somebody was making fun of that and it really resounded with me. But you know, you wanna have that discussion with them. And that third bullet there means that I feel you have to define what you mean by those terms. So you can go to the vendor and if you say, do you have machine learning? I'm going to say, yes, I do. Do you have automation? Yes. Do you work with DevOps? Yes. The answer is yes. So if you go and you say, I consider machine learning this, do you do that? I expect to have access to automation. Do you do that? Do I do it? How do I customize that automation for my processes? How do I tailor your capability for me? Can I hire your engineering to augment my staff to customize the capabilities for me? And so this is, as you think through moving to one of these frameworks, I think this is very, very critical for us to think through. The other thing I'll tout is, you know, Akamai does both content delivery and security. I encourage you to go to our blogs on either side. If you're interested in SASE, there are other vendors that have great blogs and white papers as well. As you do your education, I think this may be one of the sites that you could go in and get some insights, see some use case, and see where we're going. We have a large dedicated staff of threat researchers, so you'll constantly see things out there. Right now, there's stuff coming out on the trends we're seeing in the finance industry and, you know, those blackmailing, denial of service kind of attacks that are going on right now. And so with that, I wanted to thank you for listening and leave some time for questions. Do I have questions from the group or?
Well, I mean, I have some questions to kick it off, really, because I like that. And SASE is definitely the buzzword. You know, if last year it was CASB or MDR, I don't know, you know, this year it seems to be SASE. So how does NIST fit into the framework?
So NIST is usually thought of as a broader framework that has a number of specific subsets. So your NIST will provide you an overall governing framework. If you're in finance, they have a governing framework or compliance called FFIEC. That FFIEC is built on NIST. If you're more international, NIST is US, I would think through ISO, and it's giving you a broader one. But then it also tunnels down to implementation strategy and on technology, and gets really specific on things like encryption, or they just put one out on zero trust.
Okay, okay. Well, that's good because obviously, you know, people will want to see it's compatible. Do you have any advice for companies that are smaller or not in the cloud? I guess many people will say, "Oh, I'm too small." What's your advice?
So I think you, regardless of your size, I don't think it makes sense to willy-nilly deploy infrastructure. Um, you know, if you talk to a vendor, they're going to show you a pain point, you may solve it. But if you take the time to build your risk radar or risk register, then you want to rack and stack and solve the highest risk first. And one of the ways to build that framework and say what's most important is to start with a framework. NIST, MITRE, you know, Gartner, Forrester, they all are going to give you options. CSI, a couple others. So CIS. And so once you pick a framework, then as a small company, you can have an approach. And so the things that we're talking about here, whether it's a application firewall on the web or just a firewall, is going to fit into your framework. When you talk about zero trust, that's just access. And so you may not have customer access or remote employee access. If you're a manufacturer, the people on the floor may not have any access. So now you're thinking about the back office people, but still you want that approach. And I think SASE, if you do have an internet presence, is a great way to start and just tailor it kind of like those thin branches were.
No, I like it. And because, of course, you know, with my other hat on, I'm normally thinking about the world of MSS and MSPs. What does this mean for the managed service provider of the future? Is this inherently going to be great? Are we going to have MSPs popping up saying they're MSS, or I don't know. You know, what will happen? Actually, we've also got a nice comment in the audience. Keith Wolford, he'll be on later. He says, especially for greenfield smaller companies or companies of any size, a cloud-first strategy should be seriously considered. Not do so foregoes many capabilities, including security. So I think that's on your earlier point.
Yeah, and I agree. You know, cloud and on-prem, there is no difference in the security presence. It's just how well you do it, how well you think through it, how well you implement it. Uh, and I think there are real advantages, especially as you're growing. A lot of cloud options give you the ability to scale much more dynamically. So I agree that cloud first is a great strategy. Cloud first is not necessarily always a cheaper strategy.
So
So be aware of that.
what?
I'm sorry, I ran with the comment and not your question.
Yeah, no problem. I wanted to give Keith a chance. You know, I'm the champion of the questions. So that was good. So what's next for the MSS of the future? Obviously, you know, COVID's done a lot, but what about with the SASE framework?
So I think that you're going to see more and more companies try to have integrated capabilities. You may see MSSPs try to have a broader integration and not necessarily go SASE, but be a broader platform for everything you need for network management and incident response and remediation. You may see some SASE kind of say, well, I'm going to pull in the managed services. And again, I apologize for talking about Akamai, but Akamai for our capabilities will, most of them provide you services or engineering. It's part of kind of the criteria with SASE. You know, if you have to surge, where do you get that surge from? If you have a talent shortage, where can you leverage talent? But again, those are those one-offs. And so that goes back to your strategy decisions. Do you want to centralize all of that skill set, or are you willing to have a matrixed incident response capability?
I like it. And hey, that's given me good food for thought for the next MSS forum. So good market research. Thank you.
Awesome.
We got also Rachel says yes, the branches were a helpful visual, so that's really good. Steve, thank you very much. I hope to see you in person in Denver soon, and I hope this all blows over.
I fantasize about having a beer with somebody else someday. Yeah, I look forward to it.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, and I'll catch you in the audience. See you soon.
All right. Bye.
Perfect. And please keep the hashtag AISec trending. It's doing very well on LinkedIn. It's doing quite well on Twitter, but it could be better. So please feel free to tweet about it. We have still got an action-packed agenda. We've got lots of interesting topics coming up. We've got Stuart Phillips from HP talking about AI and automation and cyber collaboration. We've got Rachel Hartley from Recruitbit Security very kindly supporting this event. We're going to do a fireside chat with her on skill gap. We're going to have a final panel on the event horizon, the AI event horizon, with